Graphic design? Can you make a living at that?
Three, two, one, fun, 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 fun,
Welcome to Design Futures, a show about what happens after design school. I'm Chris St. Cyr, and my guest on this episode is Jibran Kutik. How are you?
I'm doing good.
How's LA?
It's great. It's beautiful.
All right. Let's get to your intro. Jibran is a senior manager of product design at Twitter, where he leads the product design team focused on new customer experience. Previously, he has worked as a UX designer in the game industry on titles that include Diablo 3, StarCraft 2, and The Sims 3. He has also worked as a product designer at LinkedIn and Netflix. And if you want to read tweets about basketball or things with wheels, you should follow him on Twitter. And he is a 2011 graduate of the Ringling College of Art and Design. How are things? That is a lot. That's a lot. But yeah, you've been out of school for 10 years now. Wow.
I cannot believe it.
Does it seem like a long time, or does it seem like yesterday you were graduating?
No, it seems like a long time. It's like really, I feel like I can't remember. I was watching one of your other episodes and you were talking to Malike about it's like really specific story about something that happened in your class. And I was like, man, I don't remember anything that happened at school anymore.
that may be a good thing. Yeah, 10 years. And you've been up to a lot. We talked previously and I was commenting on it seemed like every 2 or 3 years you were onto a new company and a new role. And I definitely want to hear about some of those things. But you're out in LA now and at Twitter, and that's new, right? That's a few months. What's it like?
Yeah,
now?
I just started in February at Twitter.
And your role is senior manager of product. So yeah, that was the thing I wanted to ask of product design team for a new customer experience. So my first like sarcastic question is like, who's living under a rock that is not on Twitter? It's been 15 years. Who's not on Twitter? Like, so there must be new people because that's your job and you have a whole team. Who are the new people that are joining Twitter these days?
Yeah, you'd be really surprised at how many people are not on Twitter already, and how many more people have like come to Twitter once and then been like, I don't know why I would use Twitter and then never come back. So that's like a lot of them too, is like people who come to Twitter for one, they want to read one tweet and then they never come back. And so those we also think of as new customers are those folks who maybe didn't figure out what they could get out of Twitter the first time around. But Twitter's actually I was actually really surprised when I started how US centric Twitter is. We are currently like really focused on international growth and where we can deliver value outside of the US. So there's some really like interesting things with you'll see Twitter in the news with some kind of big event that's happening in some other country and people will be like, oh, they're using Twitter for this tragic event or whatever's kind of happening. And so we see a lot of people come to the platform and get a lot of value out of it in those kind of scenarios. And one of the things that we're talking a lot about is like, how do we really try to continue to deliver the value that those people are getting out of the platform? How do we really address the needs that they're coming to us for? And then how do we find reasons for them to continue to stay engaged and find value, whether it's for the political things that are happening on the platform or what a lot of us are, what you and I are on Twitter for, which is to talk about design, right? That's a thing that I think a lot of people don't realize they can get. And so my team is really focused on how do we help newer customers find value right away? Because there's just an overwhelming amount of content on Twitter right now.
Is your team focused on the US or are you international, or are there different teams for that kind of breakdown?
Yeah, so my team is responsible for basically the international product. We have a couple of focuses. So there are markets where this is a really interesting thing about kind of the way that a lot of companies approach international growth, or a lot of US based companies approach international growth. And basically our team is responsible for the international product, and we come up with ideas that we think can apply internationally. And then we have a couple of teams that are focused on markets that we think are really interesting or might drive us in new directions. And so those teams come up with hypotheses that are driven by that market. So for example, Japan is a really interesting case where users get a lot of value out of Twitter in Japan. And this is, as I was talking to some friends from Japan, I found out the reason they love Twitter in Japan is that the initial like 140 character limit is like, you can write a novel in Japanese with 140 characters.
Right.
And so that was a thing where it was really interesting, where like we learned this kind of new thing in Japan, and we're learning things, from the Japanese market, and then we're taking those and applying them internationally.
Right.
And so we have some teams that are focused on markets, but my team kind of says, how can we take what we learn from all of these individual markets and apply them everywhere?
Can you talk about like your team? So you're on like new customer, and are there other teams that have a similar role that you have as senior manager? Like how does it organized in terms of like designers and teams and different markets?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Every company is really different. And that's been one of the really fascinating things, is that every company like approaches a lot of these organizations in totally different ways. And so the way we're organized at Twitter, my team is responsible for, like I said, new customer experience. And that includes what we call, I have a team that focuses on what we call top of funnel. So they're responsible for basically a lot of the initial experiences that customers are coming in through, and making those experiences better. So some examples of that are like embedded tweets, or if someone shares a tweet with you, and then the kind of the initial process of creating an account. Then we have a team that's focused on onboarding. So they handle kind of the more traditional new customer experience, the actual like creating an account. And a lot of services have like little topics and bubbles that you pick. And so
Right.
our team is responsible for trying to innovate in that space. And we have a team that's focused on notifications, and it's really a lot of work that's focused on how do we kind of get you relevant information. And a lot of where we're trying to focus this space is how do we make it more useful to you than just sending you a push notification every time something happens. We're trying to
Right.
get a little bit less of just addictive content. And then
Right.
I am part of a larger organization that we call Discovery and Connections. And so stop me if this is getting a little too boring or specific, but like that team is
I find it
responsible.
fascinating. you know
Discovery and Connections that I'm part of is basically responsible for a lot of the content consumption experience. So there's a couple of designers who work on the home timeline. There's a couple of designers who work on search, our kind of explore product, and like different trends that are happening, and events that you might find, and what's around you. And then we're part of a larger design and research org, which includes an entire research team. So my team has a researcher that I partner with who basically helps us with all of anything we want to research. So we do demographic research, we do qualitative research, we do all sorts of things to really try to understand what new problems we can solve for our customers. Then design and research also includes content design. And so we have dedicated designers who come from a writing background. And so they focus on a lot of the written content.
I hear that phrase a lot, or that job title, content design. And you just mentioned writers. Does content design only mean writing?
In design school, we would think about it as copywriting, right? And we think about it kind of more in like the pithy advertising way. In product design, it's a lot more, it kind of overlaps with technical writing. It overlaps for sure with copywriting from like the perspective of helping users understand the value prop that we're trying to show them. A lot of it has a focus on, I guess this is maybe technical writing, but like explanatory writing. So it's really helping
Right.
users understand what's going on. In
Right.
design school, we focus a lot on type. But we
Right.
don't spend a lot of time in design school focusing on what the actual words say.
Right.
We
And just
focus on just
Lauren Ipsum.
how do we make the type look good? And so it's been one of the really interesting things that I've kind of learned as working in software is the words are basically 100% of your product. They're 100% of what you're making. And so it's been really cool to have dedicated writers who come from a background of writing to really help us start from the beginning. So we don't design with Lorem Ipsum. We design with content designers and partnerships so that the end product is actually useful.
That always makes me think of the brand aspect of it, which I want to talk about certainly the visual part of it. But when we're talking about writing and that kind of content, I imagine there's some kind of part of the brand where these writers are referencing that kind of language that is Twitter. Like I remember years ago, there was an article. The New York Times was talking about redesigning. Basically, their prompt was if you sat down at the bar and the New York Times was sitting next to you, what would the personality be, right? So, like, does Twitter have that in some kind of brand document that these writers are referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just referring to, but like really owning. I think that's one of the most valuable kind of assets of content design is that they really help hold us accountable to the brand and the brand voice that we want to convey. And it's so important to have companies don't just have one brand voice, they have multiple brand voices depending on kind of the scenario. And with Twitter, it's really complicated because we want to have the fun and playful brand voice that works when you're tweeting about basketball or you're tweeting about dumb memes, right? You want that playful voice,
Right.
but we also have to have a serious and grown up voice when we're talking about elections, or even getting into like integrity of elections. And
Right.
so it's this interesting balance of us trying to be kind of this approachable brand that people can relate to, but also taking the appropriate and serious tone when things are happening on the platform that require a little bit more finesse. That's a lot of where content design really pushes the product design team, because designers in general, we always want to make the wacky and the weird stuff. And
Yeah.
it's nice to have content designers who tend to they also want to have fun and be wacky, but they also are like, whatever we're making, it has to work as well for tweeting stupid memes as it does for tweeting about elections. And so that's a really kind of fine line to walk.
The news cycle is so fast these days, but even the news organizations aren't as fast as regular people just opening their phone and getting on Twitter. When I really think about it, like, man, things have changed so much in terms of how fast we get information these days.
Yeah, it's weird. It's funny. One of the things that I was really surprised about when I started here, they were talking about kind of some of the major milestones in the history of the company. One of the first times that Twitter was kind of a news source was, do you remember when the airplane went down into the Hudson River in New York?
Oh yeah.
Is that Sully? That was one of like the first things that really happened on Twitter before it happened in the news. And I was like, well, that feels like that was like yesterday. That doesn't feel like it was that long ago that happened. And so it is interesting how recently even Twitter has made this transition from kind of silly tool to actually news source. That's
Right.
been a really interesting thing for the business.
It's like I said, it's pretty amazing how things have changed like that. I want to bring up this image that you sent me to talk about get back to this brand aspect of our conversation. So this is Figma, is that right?
Yeah.
This is
So
Figma. And so my question, based on, like, you're talking about like all these different teams and the brand and everything, and I see this is like little note of component updates available on the screenshot. It's like, I mean, Twitter must be huge. Like, so is there a whole library of the assets that everybody's working on, these same assets to keep that consistency as far as the visual component of the brand?
yeah, I thought this would be a really fun image to show, because I'm assuming a lot of design schools probably still really heavily focused on Adobe products.
Right.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the new tools that we use and why we use them. And so Figma, I've used in the last couple of places that I've worked, and I've always hated design tools. I find the discussion about design tools to be really annoying. But Figma is this really like kind of special tool that I'm sure a lot of your students are asking about. A lot of designers want to know more about, and it's fully online. You can use Figma in like a web browser, so it works on everything. Because it's online, everyone at the company can have access to it and can get into it. So it's not just, it works for every one of our designers. So this project is one that all of the designers have access to and can get into and can mess around with. But also the people that we work with, so product managers and engineers, can drop in here and leave comments in it. We have a design systems team who's responsible for kind of managing our component library. And when they update things, those things just show up in the work automatically, which is really cool. So we're never worried about working with out-of-date components. Everything is always kind of the most recent representation of the brand, which is really, really cool.
I've been hearing a lot more of Figma, talking to former students. This is definitely the tool that people I've heard more about, is Figma, just because of all the collaboration and the seamlessness of it and ease of use too. Yeah, there was this other image that we definitely need to talk about. Like, you show this to a student or young designer, and I'm sure it makes them a little anxious, just want to quit right now. You're obviously like at a higher level, so your calendar is probably more full of like meetings, maybe, than some. Obviously, we don't need to talk about your events that you have in this calendar image that we're looking at, but it does lead to the question of like, what's your day like? Like, what do you do as a manager at that level?
It definitely depends. So I spend probably equal parts of my time on supporting my team, is probably the kind of the biggest thing. And that kind of runs a gamut of focusing on making sure my team is set up for success on a day-to-day basis, making sure that they are working towards their career goals. I personally like bias really heavily towards helping designers really identify and work towards their career goals. As a new manager at Twitter, a new team of people that I didn't know very well, that's what I spend a lot of my time on right now, is really digging into, what did you come to Twitter for? What are you looking to get out of your career? A thing I always like to dig into with designers on my team is like, what do you want to do next?
And they say,
that's
I want your job.
it's funny. I've been talking to a lot of designers on my team. There are designers that I think would make really excellent managers. And I'm often like, I think you'd be really good at this if you want to do it. And a lot of the time they're like, I don't want it. I have no interest in managing. It's really surprises to me how few designers really actually want to be managers.
Yeah. Well, they're looking at this calendar. It's like, I don't want that calendar.
It's funny because you get a lot of complaints from folks who aren't managers about how busy they are. Like, man, I don't have any time.
You mentioned the team and getting to know them because you are fairly new. Was that team in place when you came on board?
Yeah, pretty much. Everyone that's on my team right now was already here before I started. Since I've started, I have a couple of designers that actually started this week that I've hired, but everyone that was here when I started.
You sent me some of these other images, and this one here is about building team. This is at a previous company. Can you talk a little bit about this, or is it similar or different than like the team building that you're doing at Twitter?
Yeah, so this is the job I had before Twitter. This was a startup that I worked for. I actually lived in Columbus, Ohio for almost 3 years while I worked at this startup. There, I joined as more or less the first product design manager. So I was head of product design, and there were 2 designers who were already there when I started. I then spent most of that 3 years growing the design team and hiring designers. And so I was really proud of, these are 4 designers on the team that I hired. 3 of them I hired. One of them was there when I started, and I forced them all to present at a IXDA. We hosted IXDA, our local chapter of IXDA in Columbus, and I forced my designers to talk about the difference between product design and UX design, because I think this is kind of one of the classic questions. And so I love this photo because I was sitting in the front row, just really proud of all of them for agreeing to get up on stage and talk about this topic that no one really wants to be responsible for talking about.
So Root Insurance, that's the company. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that's part of being a good manager is support, but also push, right? You push them out there, get on stage or present or talk to people about what they do. So this image here, what was this one here? It looks like it's like you're doing some user testing or focus group or something.
Yeah, so this is one of my like favorite thing about being a designer is conceptual qualitative research. And so basically what we do is we build a prototype that ideally works as closely to what we would actually build in real life. We put it in front of customers and we just watch how they use it. We ask them questions about their experience using it, and we design and product management and engineering sit in the back room and talk about how we can make things better based off of that feedback. There's like these kind of 2 forces together that I think are really magical, which is in real life, watching your customer use your thing there's nothing more impactful than that to a designer, to see exactly what we were talking about earlier, where you make something and users, what all the things you thought were obvious are incredibly obscure to them and they can't figure it out. But then you also get these really great ideas when you've got, the product manager and the engineer sitting there with design, and they're seeing users, struggle with things, and all of the brain cells are firing, and everyone is just like so excited about the possibility of what we could make. Right. And so I think it's a really fun environment.
Definitely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. This is one of the things that years ago when I started teaching a more lengthy version of a UX design course, where I had students actually testing their paper prototypes, in a very basic way, like, ask your parents or your roommates, to help you test out this by, completing a user goal and trying to go through the user flow. And every student learns something, about what they're designing, right? So when you put the thing in front of somebody who doesn't know anything about your project, you're definitely going to learn something. It's always fun to see that happen and see the students get excited about, like, oh yeah, I didn't really do it the right way because this isn't working out, but I'm not so far along in the process, I can't, change it. I can't fix it.
it's an interesting thing about school, because like working professionally, failure is basically the standard. My expectation is that everything we design the first time will be wrong, and we're going to learn through either getting it in the hands of our customers or doing research like this. And so it's
Yeah.
an interesting thing. I'm really curious how you approach trying to teach that, because you have to grade students too. And so that's, I think, a thing that I think is really interesting and challenging, especially once you get past kind of the objective things around like type and layout can be objectively good or bad. But when you're
Right.
actually talking about design solutions, anything can be right. And it's really about, do you solve a problem for your customer? And
Yeah.
it's a hard thing to figure out without just seeing if it works.
You worked for a little while at Netflix on the product. Is that right? On mobile?
Yeah. Yeah. So at Netflix, I was also on kind of a new customer experience or a growth team. And this was the last job that I did as an individual contributor before I transitioned into management. I think one of the things that's really difficult about sign up funnels, or kind of this field of like growth design, is that people don't want to spend money on things that they don't want.
Yeah.
And
That makes sense.
so a lot of your job as kind of a designer working in this space is, how do you help customers identify whether or not they want your service? And it's not about, as a designer, there's this fine line between, we talk about dark patterns, and you can trick users into buying something on accident, or you can try to show them the value that they might get from your product. And so I try really, really hard to lean into that idea of, how do we make this feel valuable? And
Yeah.
what we refer to something as like cognitive. We talk about this idea of like cognitive load. And so how hard is something to interpret as you're walking through it? And so this screen was really just showing a couple of ideas that I was exploring while I was looking through this work around, how do we reduce the cognitive load on the screen, so as a user I can focus on the things that you're asking me to do, and then essentially save that kind of mental capacity for the hard decisions, like, do I want to pay for this? What am I going to get out of the service? Because like creating an email and password should be a mindless thing to do, right? It shouldn't be hard. And so here it's simple things like highlighting the field that you're focused on in a way that's easy to understand. It's the check mark that you've completed this in a way that's validated by the service. Being able to show and hide password is a thing that drastically increases the likelihood that someone is actually going to create a password and be able to log into their experience. So that's another thing that's really interesting. It was working at Netflix. We A/B test everything. And so here I was actually, we were able to, I built this and able to see, when I have show hide password versus not having it, you increase the likelihood that someone's both going to sign up and be able to actually access their account by allowing them that little show button. And so that's kind of what I wanted to focus on here, is all these little details that are really together add up to make something so much easier for a customer, and make it so they can actually use your product in the end.
That's fascinating. Just the hide and show makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Hide and show password. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, these little things, they're easy to overlook or like think aren't that important, and they can make a really big difference, especially when you add them up together.
Right.
The step counter on this screen of letting customers know how much is left to do increase the likelihood that they were going to end up signing up, because you don't want to be in this endless flow. You want to know what you've got ahead of you, and whether or not you can get it done in the time you have.
So the cognitive load is the idea that there's only things on the screen that the user's focused on, not cluttering up their space.
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of just like reducing the number of things someone has to parse at any given time. The fewer things, I can't remember exactly what it is. I heard somewhere this idea that like humans can only keep like 3 to 7 things in their head at any one time. And so as a designer, I think our job is to reduce the number of extra things we're asking you to keep in your mind on top of all the other stuff you've got going on. Because none of the products that I've worked on are more important than probably most of the stuff going on in the rest of your day. And so I don't want to presume that like signing up for Netflix should take up five of your 7 things. If I can make it just one, that's way better.
The other phrase that you mentioned, maybe you could talk a little bit about, or maybe there might be examples that you know of, is dark patterns. What's a dark pattern?
Yeah, so dark patterns are basically just the idea of designing something that essentially tricks someone into doing something that you as the business want someone to do. So because we're A/B testing and everything that a software company makes is measurable, it's really easy to fall into a trap where you say, oh, my responsibility this quarter is to increase the number of people who sign up. And I can drastically increase the number of people who sign up if I tell them Netflix is free, but you have to get paid, you have to pay for it. That would kind of be a dark pattern where if we lied to you about something until right at the last minute, we could increase the likelihood that you click on that first button on the first screen. And these are all over the internet. This one I thought was actually really, the reason I had this in here is I think this is a really interesting one of just, again, like this little detail, which is, do you use a drop down or do you use a text input to enter
Right.
date? This is again a debate I had with my product manager where she was confident that a drop down was better and I was 100% confident that entering a date was better. And instead of fighting about this thing that neither of us knew anything about, we just tested them. I think it's important to say that I was right. Entering
I was gonna say, I read in your
drop
notes you
downs
were
are
right.
horrible. The drop
Just-
downs are the worst.
Just enter the text, right?
Yeah, it was very easy. And again, was like a statistically significant increase in the likelihood that someone would complete the flow because it's easier to, you don't have to think about anything. You enter the numbers just like you enter them, just like
Right.
you're reading them on your credit card.
That's why I included this last example, because I just love the idea that there's more than one way to solve the problem, and that you're testing it and you're really putting it out there to get the answer for your particular audience.
I think that's a really important thing is like design isn't, like I was saying before, like there's never a right or wrong way to design something. It's just a way, whatever way you end up doing it. And it's fun to see when you're right and when you're wrong.
So you have, how many people are on your team?
Right now, 7.
So you're the manager. Are they all designers?
Mhm.
They're all
Yeah.
designers. And so what are the kind of responsibilities that the individual designers have? Do they have like a focus?
Yeah, so I have kind of 3 teams that all report into me.
Oh, okay.
And so I have 2 designers who are focused on kind of the onboarding experience, 3 designers who are focused on the top of funnel experience, and then 2 who are focused on notifications.
Oh, okay.
Did that add up to the right number?
We'll edit that out if the numbers don't add up. It's 2 designers talking. Do the numbers really need to add up? Yeah, I don't know. So speaking of numbers, so I do want to get your take on salary. You've been out for 10 years. You've had multiple positions, right? You started as designer and now you're at a senior level, a senior manager. And you're in tech, so those salaries, as I've experienced, tend to be higher. So, but what's a range of salary for somebody with your experience, 10 years in tech?
I think it depends a lot on region. So this is one of the things that's been really interesting with COVID is because people aren't so centralized anymore. We're starting to see this kind of interesting effect where salaries are kind of increasing in some parts of the country and kind of normalizing in some of the others. And so depending on where you are in the US, I think you can probably look at between like 175 and 250 for base salary. And then depending on the tech company you're at, that they add in things like bonus and stock as well. So some companies will give you stock options or RSUs.
And then you're in LA, so that's a major city. So that's something that I'm curious to see what happens in the next few years as far as salaries, because there's been some articles past year about all these companies allowing people to work remotely, right? Well, but my salary was X when I was working in New York City, but now I want to work in this small town where the cost of living is much lower. And, so I'm sure there's going to be some fluctuation in terms of, where salaries land as more and more people want to work remote.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. It's been like I think a conversation in the community a lot about like, well, if you're delivering the same value that the company was willing to pay for, why should it matter where you live? So Twitter was already kind of going to this, trying to move to this like dispersed workforce.
Mhm.
One of the things that was really, they kind of started 2020 with was they wanted a workforce that represented their audience. And so they were already trying to spread people out. And so now they have this thing where they're never requiring anyone to go back to the office. And we're really intentionally trying to hire a lot more internationally and a lot more outside of kind of the big city centers.
You're not from LA, are you?
No.
No, you're not. Okay, so this is your first time living there?
Yeah. So when I worked at Netflix, I spent a lot of time down here.
Okay.
This is the first time that I live here.
What's it like?
I love it here. It's funny. So after graduation, I moved to Salt Lake City for a year, which was wild. And then I moved to the Bay Area where I was for most of the last 10 years. I loved California and I missed it, but my wife and I both really wanted to get away from the tech culture of the Bay Area. It's when you work in tech and then every time you go to a coffee shop, everyone is talking about their startups and everybody else works in tech.
Really? It's like, it's cliche. It's like
like so
a movie.
Awful.
Yeah.
You can't go anywhere. You can't like escape it. We're like confident we wanted to move back to California, but we both really loved LA. And so we're like, let's give this a try. It helps that we have good friends who live here. That makes it a lot easier.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I was looking on your Twitter. So you're a big basketball fan? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Clippers or Lakers?
I'm not getting on any of the LA bandwagons yet.
Okay. Not yet. So who's your team?
I kind of just follow whoever's fun to watch.
You like the game. You like
Yeah,
the
I really
game?
just like watching
Yeah.
it.
Now things are going to open up. What are you going to do there in LA? What are you excited to get back out to doing?
I love to eat. And so I'm excited to, I mean, it's not like I haven't been getting takeout and stuff, and everything is outdoor dining here all the time. So that's been
Yeah.
really nice. But I'm excited to finally get back to some of the restaurants that weren't able to open and kind of see what's out there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love about California is like you just have this great access to nature in the mountains. And it's a
Mhm.
little harder down here than it was in the Bay Area, but I'm really excited to getting out of the mountains and out of the desert is
Yeah.
always a really good thing.
The desert. Oh, that does sound hot.
The beach
Oh
is
man.
good though.
Yeah, the beach, right? So how
Uh,
far are you how long does it take you to get to the beach?
I'm close to the beach, but Sarasota ruins California beaches for you. You can't.
Oh,
I complain. I go there and it's too cold.
I'm not a beach person, but when I was teaching at Ringling, we would go to Siesta Key Beach. I tell people, I grew up in Maine where, the coastline is rocky and the water is like freezing. It's like you don't swim in the ocean in New England. But when I lived in Florida, we were like, 10-minute drive from Siesta Key Beach, and it's like powdered sugar. It's like, it's always on those one of those top 10 lists, top 10 beaches in
Hmm.
America kind of thing. And I kind of got spoiled, It's like, wow, it's like this is a nice beach. I don't like beaches, but for a guy that doesn't like beaches, I kind of like this beach. This is nice.
It's a good one.
Yeah. So let's talk about Ringling. I was gonna try to find some of your student projects, but most of what I found is all Swift files, so you can't look at them. I kept getting this warning like download it at your own risk or something like I don't know, my computer's gonna explode. So you grew up in Orlando, so you're pretty
Mhm.
close by Sarasota. How did you find out about Ringling and what was your experience like there?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up in Florida and go like being in art classes in Orlando, Ringling is just kind of like has a presence.
Mm.
I had initially wanted to go to school in New York, and I got really excited about Ringling for the animation program. And so I went down to check out the school for animation, and I saw like in the lobby, they used to have like the lobby in I think it was over in Keating maybe, and they had motion design stuff on the walls, and I was like,
Oh,
oh, that is what I want to do. And so that's kind of how I ended up there. Is like I went to visit the campus and I saw examples of like the motion design work, and I
all
just
right.
got really excited about it.
And so did you took art classes in high school, and did you take any design courses?
No,
Is that
I
offered?
didn't
No.
didn't know anything about design except for that I was doing, I think, the standard thing of like making websites for my parents.
Right.
I was in AP like 3D art because I wasn't good enough to get into the 2D art class. They didn't let me in. They would just let me in the 3D class because no one else signed up for it.
You had an extra dimension you were working with. It seems
Yeah.
better than just 2D. I don't.
I don't know. So I took AP 3D art, and I took a bunch of like the art history classes and really enjoyed. I think that's where I maybe really got into a little bit of like design stuff, is learning some about that.
The program at Ringling is like a lot of programs, is exposure to different kinds of design. Was there a moment or something that happened you decided you wanted to work in sort of the digital space of design or product design?
I think I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed the web classes that I was taking. And I feel like I can't remember if I know I had a web class with Mina, and I thought that I had a web class with you at some point where we were doing,
We did the interactive zine.
yeah.
Yeah, we did
Uh
like a print version and then had you guys like make it digital and interactive. And that was before all these awesome tools that we have now. So I can't remember what we might have used. We might have used the interactive tools within InDesign. I'd have to go look at. Some people might have used Flash. I can't remember some of that.
I like loved Flash. So that was like a
Yeah.
big thing for me. It was like I just loved Flash, and I got really excited about what I could do with ActionScript. And so like that was a really big thing for me. And then Alan Harrison taught basically a UX design class. In that class, there was this really specific internship that I wanted, and I did all of the work. I designed everything to like get that internship because this is like my junior year. I was in that class.
You had focus. That's good.
Yeah. And it worked out, and I got this internship working on a web team at a game company. And so that was kind of like the first step. And I was like, okay, this kind of makes sense. I like this.
Where was the internship?
So that was at a company called Blizzard Entertainment. And so they
Okay.
make
Right.
World of Warcraft and Diablo and StarCraft.
Right. Is that in Orlando
No,
or
that
was
was in
that?
Irvine in Orange County,
Okay.
California.
Oh,
So that was the
great.
first time I lived in California, I came out for that internship, and it was a trip.
Was it all summer?
Yeah, it was 3 months. It was awesome. It was great. They paid for my housing the whole summer. I didn't have a car in Orange County, which is impossible to get around in. So I like lived at like a mall and I could walk to the office. That was like my whole summer. It was not as exciting as I think all my classmates who went to New York, but I worked a lot and I learned a ton. I was fortunate that I was there while they were shipping 2 kind of big games, and so I got to work on both of those projects.
As far as like the school and going into art school, can you talk a little bit about what your support system was like, and then entering art school?
Yeah, no, I was really lucky. My parents are both really creative people. My dad, when I was born, my dad actually owned like a screen printing business. And so they were super, super supportive. I also took a year off between high school and college. And so I had a lot of time to really figure out, is this the right thing that I want to do? And when I went into school, I think I was a lot more serious than some of my classmates who take, when you kind of just go straight in, because I kind of spent that summer working and kind of thinking about where I wanted to go, and got out some of kind of the first time living alone, do whatever I want stuff.
Do you recommend the gap year?
I think if I didn't do it, I don't think I would have made it through school.
Yeah.
I think it was really important for me.
More and more every year I get more convinced that the gap year, I'm there now. I mean, I think everybody needs a gap year after high school. I think there are a lot of 18-year-olds that are not ready to be in college, and because it's much more serious than high school.
I feel like I got a better understanding of like where the money was going and how much the money was worth, because I was like spending that time working and seeing how long it would take me to make the money back that it cost. And so I feel like I was also, that was like much more present in my mind of like, oh, this is not free.
Right. I better take this seriously. I mean, you want to have fun in college, but there's also, the reality of it all, Yeah, I take the gap. I need a gap year right now.
Me too.
All right, let's get to the pop quiz. It's the pop quiz time. First question for you is about basketball. What is your favorite basketball trick shot?
I really like the pass off the backboard. I just think that's a really fun. That's always, but they get that in a game, that team is just like running away with it.
Okay, work beverage.
Water mostly. I have 1 coffee a day and I drink a lot of water.
After work beverage, when you're when your team, your Friday afternoon, or
when we're at a happy hour, I tend to gravitate to whiskey.
Sketchbook, blank or gridded?
I am a terrible person. I don't keep a sketchbook.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
You have a spreadsheet, Mr. Manager.
A lot of Google Docs. I have a bunch of blank sketchbooks that are gridded and lined, and they're all mostly empty. But I feel terrible about it every time I see one of them.
Just give a little scribble and then move on to your spreadsheets. Okay, Jibran, I gotcha. Top 3 Twitter accounts that we all should follow. Do you have like 3 that stand out?
Oh, this is really hard. I think if you're a designer and you're up and coming in the industry, I think it'd be really cool to follow Dantley Davis, who's the head of design at Twitter. There aren't a lot of, the role of CDO is really new. There aren't a lot of them. And he's, I think, one of the most public ones.
So that's Chief Design Officer.
Chief Design Officer at Twitter, Dantley Davis. I think House of Highlights is really fun about basketball. Follow Bradley Brownell, who's an automotive journalist. That'll cover all my bases: design, cars, and basketball.
Got it. All right. Sounds good. Laptop or desktop?
Laptop.
Favorite streaming service?
Spotify? Does that count?
Yeah, sure. I haven't specified,
I like Spotify. That's the one I use the most.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. All right. Last question in the quiz: design or manage?
I love being a manager. I really, really enjoy it.
That's awesome to hear. You get the last word, the final thoughts. But since you work for Twitter, you only get 280 characters to do it in. Okay, I'm just kidding. Your final thoughts.
I feel like the biggest thing is just like, you don't have to know what you're doing yet. I think when you start out, it's really scary and you think you have to have things figured out. And I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm sure everyone who's at least 10 years in is probably, the longer you're here, the less you think you know what you're doing. And so I'd say just like go with the flow. Don't worry about having everything figured out.
That's good advice. It was great to catch up with you. The magic hour is gone. The light behind you is the sun's going down. I guess it's time to end it. It's great to catch up, Ron.
Yeah, likewise. I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for hanging out.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks.
Wipe those tears from your eyes, from your eyes, from your eyes.
What do we learn from Jibran? If you enjoy working in teams and helping designers reach their career goals like Jibran does, then be a design manager. Also, take a year off after high school. It will help you get the most out of the college experience. Thanks to Jibran Kutik of Twitter. If you have any comments or questions for me or any of the guests, please leave them in the comments and subscribe so you can catch the next episode of Design Futures. Until next time, go learn something. Your future depends on it. Thanks for listening. See ya.